What happened in London on September 16th, 1992? Does the information help that the day went down in history as Black Wednesday? I didn't have a clue when this date was first pointed out to me. I'm afraid that is the case with many contemporaries in Germany. For the British, this day is considered to be the worst humiliation since Suez. The Suez Crisis of 1956-57, as we recall from the series The Crown, is a central date in the decline of the British Empire. But the Black Wednesday? On that day, England was forced by the European community to withdraw from the European exchange rate mechanism, which sounds technical but caused the country to devalue its currency and lose around £3.3 billion. Approval for the Conservative government and Prime Minister John Major fell from 42 to 29%. The blame for this humiliation was put on the Deutsche Bundesbank, which was unwilling to help the British with a rate cut, and the federal government, which many Britons believe has been an irresponsible hegemon in Europe since reunification. The speculator George Soros had the right nose early on and successfully bet against the pound. A lot can be learned from the history of Black Wednesday. First of all, that trauma lingers longer in the collective memory than victories. This could be related to the fact that we Germans have great difficulties understanding the British exit from the EU. To this day it sounds reproachful as to how one could be so foolish as to forego all the blessings of the EU out of misunderstood national pride. Consequently, the insulted and intransigent position of Brussels in the Brexit negotiations met with great approval. UK imitators are warned. Black Wednesday was a turning point. Since then, the Eurosceptics have had the upper hand in England. Well, that's how some of the editors where I read about the Black Wednesday read it from the political scientist Vernon Bogdanor, a professor at King's College in London. In the years before 1992, the British government had struggled to get popular support for joining the European community in 1972. Bogdanor's recently published book, Britain and Europe in a Restless World, is recommended to accompany the current final act of Brexit. In the end, the reader has a lot of understanding for Brexit, although, or perhaps because, the author is not a Brexiteer, but rather thinks that his country would have done better to stay in the EU. The thesis of the book is, Brexit is not an industrial accident in history, but the result of an ambivalent relationship between the British and the continent. Great Britain has always been reluctant to join the common market, the European community and, most recently, the EU, has avoided the euro and, even in the decades of its EU membership, has never oriented itself unconditionally towards Europe. There are many reasons for this. One of them is centuries of domination over a global empire. Who suddenly wanted to let France or Germany talk them into it? Think of Neville Chamberlain's radio address on the Munich Agreement in 1938. The Prime Minister said it was incredible that England was being forced to deal with a conflict in a distant land between peoples we know nothing about. It's a good 1,000 kilometers from London to Munich. Chamberlain would hardly have spoken so blankly if there had been a conflict in Sydney, more than 10,000 kilometers from London. There was never a lack of weighty voices in Labour, as in the Tories, to warn against the communization of Europe. Bogdanor quotes the pretty saying of a Labour politician from the late 1940s. Whoever opens Pandora's box can never know which Trojan horses will be thrown out. It was above all very contrary economic concepts that linked mainland Europeans and British to the community. It started with agriculture. Britain benefited from cheap imports from the Commonwealth. Their own agriculture, never really systematically relevant, was supported with tax revenues. France and Germany, on the other hand, guaranteed their farmers fixed purchase prices. The difference is considerable. One time the taxpayers pay for agriculture, the other time the consumer, to the detriment of importers from non-European countries. This shows that the European community itself has been an ambivalent construct since its inception. Internally liberal, externally an illiberal fortress. Nobody has seen this character of the EU better than Margaret Thatcher, who grew older, got the more Eurosceptic. If there was a program of economic freedom for all members at the origin of the community, this would be more and more undermined by communalization actions in monetary and social policy that undermine the market mechanism she found. We did not successfully shrink the state in order to ultimately submit to a European superstate dominated by Brussels, said the Iron Lady in a famous European lecture in Brugge in 1988. Paradoxically, the socialists in the kingdom had completely opposite concerns. While Thatcher criticized Europe as anti-market, Labour saw the EU as a project of cold deregulation and privatization, which ran counter to its goal of a socialist society. As different as the reservations were, the result was identical. Leave us alone on the island with the European community. It has not yet been decided whether after Brexit the kingdom will be isolationist protectionist, or perhaps more economically open to the EU and become a Singapore on the Thames. Although with the deal, that will be a really tough one, if you don't want to break off a lot of parts of the deal already in the beginning. It wasn't just the financial and refugee crisis after the turn of the millennium, and certainly not just the emergence of irrational populism that led to the Brexit majority in the 2016 referendum. The British have always had reasons to feel uncomfortable in the EU. Vernon Bogdanor gives the peoples of the EU good advice to take these worries seriously for their part as well. Learning is better than indignation. What that means? Say goodbye to the pathos of an ever closer union with an even greater loss of sovereignty for the nation states under a supranational Brussels regime. It would be better to develop the EU further as a close association of national sovereign governments. There is an alternative to wanting to force the United States of Europe to secure international peace. The lessons from 1914 and the message from the disintegration of Yugoslavia in 1992 shows that even multi-ethnic states can ultimately fail militarily. That was the opinion of Bogdanor, but I dare to disagree. A positive and federal Europe is possible. Not right now, but it is possible in the future. And it's easiest to see that this can work if you are a German, because we live in a federal state. And you won't really believe this if you don't know very much about Germany, but the corona crisis had one advantage. It showed us the positive effects of a federal state. And it showed us that the national government in a federal state is not the almighty, all-powerful being, and the states are nothing. Our states were in charge, and our states did a good job there. And that is why I believe if in a distant future we go to a Europe with willing countries, that will be like a federal states where the competences are really split up between the nations and Brussels, where everybody knows who's responsible for what and who has to say in what area. Then it can work well. If you want to stay informed, please subscribe to my channel and my other channels. I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.